There we go. And I will just caveat this with, I am actually coming to you live this morning, and Nadia as well, from our hotel rooms in Omaha. And the air conditioner keeps like going on and off. So if you can hear that, I apologize. I can't do anything about it. If you can't hear it, great. All right, so our last session today, like I mentioned, our focus today is planning for a future of even stronger instruction. And I think you all know us all pretty well by now, but just in case, I'm Nimisha Thakur, Director of Academics here at TNTP. And I'll let Nadia and Abby quickly say hi as well.
Good morning, Nadia Nibs, sitting in my very cozy room at the Kimpton. I think that's what this place is called, right? Yes, very excited to be here with you all today.
Hey y'all, I'm Abby Robinson, Senior Manager of Academics, not in Omaha, but sitting in my office in Chicago this morning and excited to see you all.
All right, moving right along. Just like always, we have a few housekeeping items. These are the same as they have been for the last 4 sessions. So while I'm voicing over this slide, just make sure you take this next minute or two to make sure you've signed in and downloaded the participant handout from Google Classroom. Abby is also, in just a moment, going to drop a link in the chat for these things if you need direct access to them. And then once you have all of that done, we would so appreciate it if you would take a minute to update your Zoom username with your school, district, or ESU. And like always, if you are sitting in a room with other folks, with another group of people, please indicate that in your username so that we can just use that information when we figure out breakout rooms. And then I'll just pause here for maybe 30 seconds to a minute to let everybody get that situated. And if you need help finding anything, drop us a note in the chat. Okay. In lieu of one of our like thematic icebreaker activities today, we actually just want to give you the space to shout out yourself a little bit. So we're going to give everybody a couple minutes to think about this and then just share in the chat something that you have done this year to positively impact instruction. And I know you're all going to want to shout out your team and others, but shout out yourself. What have you done? If you haven't already, take the next minute to just skim over the other shout outs in the chat. And make a note if somebody did something that you want to do, make a note of who you might want to reach out to. Thank you all so much for sharing. It is, Nadia mentioned in the chat, it's super exciting to see so many of these comments are around giving teachers feedback, getting into classrooms. And we love to see that we know it's not an easy thing to ask of school leaders who already have a really packed schedule and lots of fires to be putting out. It's not always an easy thing to ask to be in classrooms more. So we just wanted to make sure that you have this space to kind of pat yourself on the back. You guys have done some really hard work and really hard reflecting, both in these sessions and just in the, the rest of the year. And I know many of you are like, it's only April, the year's not over, but this is our last session. So we wanted to give you the space to just shout yourself out a little bit and take a second to really embrace that you are doing incredible work every day and making a difference and improving instruction. So shout out to you and thank you for being here. With that, I will pass it to Shirley Vargas for a few minutes, since this is our last session. Take it away, Shirley.
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate you all being on, and also for those who will watch this in the future, thank you for tuning in. Can't believe it's our last session. If you've been with us since the very beginning in 2018, this work has taken a lot of iterations, and I will have to say that this one has been the most intentional, and given the feedback that you all continue to provide through the surveys, through informal conversations with me or your colleagues or others or TNTP, I continue to feel affirmed in the work that we're doing, especially when we discussed the debriefs from the school visits. I think that is something that we will continue to think through how we can make that happen, not only for our CSI schools, but for our non-CSI schools, and what that means in relation to goals that schools have, right? Some of those things related to just seeing other classrooms that are maybe in your district or not in your district, thinking through how you push each other's thinking, right? How one principal might show up to another school and have that conversation with another principal or a teacher leader, another teacher leader, and then ultimately engaging in specific conversations around improving instruction, around improving teacher practice, around really understanding and deciphering student work, ways in which us at the NDE really have not done before and continue to learn how to provide more of those opportunities. Super exciting and grateful for you all to be willing to engage in that type of work with us so that we can learn from you and with you. So I want to thank you for your work, your commitment, your time, your reflection. Even if at times it feels like, why on earth are we doing this? I appreciate you sticking through it and showing up every day for that. And then the last thing, kind of housekeeping related, you will be receiving an email from myself later in the day related to what we do every year, which is like an end of year report. It's called an implementation report. And because you received SF5 funds this year or last year, we are just required to make sure that we continue with that process. In the past, it's been like every few months or like every quarter, or every semester. And this year we're just doing it once. And we'll make sure to give you all ample opportunity to ask us any questions if you have related to that. So again, thank you. Thanks for being on, and thanks for continuing to do this meaningful work. Turn it back to Namisha and the team.
Thank you, Shirley. So this is our last session, but I do want to briefly mention right now that we are going to be offering one more final touch point over the next couple of weeks. Somewhat similar to the office hours we facilitated last spring. If you joined any of those with us, in those office hours, we just met one-on-one with each school, to support you all with writing your SFI applications and setting school improvement goals. And we want to offer one more like 30 to 45-minute check-in over the next couple weeks to just give you continue the conversation from today in sort of a one-on-one setting and to think more specifically and strategically about your school's plans. So we'll talk more about that near the end of today's session and give you the chance to sign up for those today in the session so you don't have to think about it later. But before we get to all of that, over the next couple of hours, here are the objectives that we're aiming for. We're going to spend some time reflecting on the momentum and progress that you all have made in classroom instruction and instructional coaching. Then we're going to look ahead to interrogate your plans for instructional improvements heading into next year to hopefully start to identify some areas where we can embed even more instructional coaching. And then you're going to have some time to develop or refine those plans for instructional coaching and teacher support. Knowing that these are the things we're covering today, as always, take a minute to skim over our norms. They're the same as they've always been. Read over them and pop into the chat. What do you want to prioritize for yourself today so that you can get the most out of the next few hours?
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for dropping your focus in the chat. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into our first segment together today. So, in addition to thinking about the objectives that we have for today, we're actually going to be grounding in an essential question. And let's go ahead and have someone from LPS Clinton coming off mute and reading that essential question.
How will you keep the momentum you've built and progress you've made this year going into next year?
Exactly. So this is the question of the session, essentially, right? Thinking about not only maintaining that momentum, but continuing that momentum into the next year. So we're going to be using this essential question to do 3 things, right? As we kind of mentioned in the objectives, we're going to use this question to help us reflect on the past year. We're going to use it to help us interrogate the plans that we currently have. And additionally, we're going to use it to help us plan for a future where we can actually maintain that momentum and see even more progress. So in order for us to think about how to maintain momentum, let's actually take stock in some of the things that have happened over the last 12 months, really. So first, when you think about last winter and spring, many of you engaged in an academic diagnostic with TNCP, right? And that diagnostic allowed us to really take a closer look at the state of the 4 key resources at each of your schools. Of course, that's grade appropriate assignments, strong instruction, high expectations, and deep engagement. Then from here, many of you, right, utilize those office hours that Amisha mentioned earlier to help us think through, wow, like what resources should we be asking for? How do we make our goals strong, crystal clear, and actionable towards improving instruction? And then additionally, we were able to think through, sweet, well, what are some of those initiatives we want to make sure we plan out and make really explicit in our applications and our plans? From there, we started to do the work. So while embarking on those initiatives at your respective schools, you were working hard here in these sessions with us, right? During our School Improvement Institute, if you will, where we actually thought really critically about, well, what is a vision for strong instruction? What should it look like? What components should it have in it? And of course, we investigated the impact of instructional coaching specifically as a tool to see some of that instructional improvement and gains in our respective contexts. And finally, in terms of just like looking back, we had opportunities to visit other schools and actually apply that learning. Take that vision for strong instruction, take the TNCP core rubric, go into classrooms, observe together, level set, push each other's thinking, right? Have dynamic and really strong dialogues with one another about what is it that we're seeing and how does that actually calibrate with what we thought was strong instruction, and how do we recalibrate for this new vision and this stronger vision. So that was an experience that a lot of folks said was really impactful. And we still think it was a fantastic opportunity for us to engage in together as a community. So now here we are in spring 2024 in our last session where we have our eye on the horizon, really focusing on the future. And again, yes, it's April 11th. We know that we have several more weeks of school. And what's great about this opportunity is that we get to carve out a chance now to start to think ahead, which we don't often get to do. So really quick, thinking about most immediately, what are some of the things we discussed in our last session? We got very, very tactical, right? So yes, today we're thinking big picture, we're thinking about momentum, we're thinking about progress, but we're coming off the heels of a very tactical session where first you identified patterns in a sample data set and you made insights and posed questions to mine for additional context, right? What are the things that we noticed, the things that we wonder? What are the questions we want to ask to gain even more context for the data that you got, the sample data set that you got? You then use that data to make a sample action plan, where you had guiding questions to really think through that change framework that we see through MTSS, and really got to apply some of that within the context of observation data. And then you were given the charge to go through this process at your own schools and apply that similar process. And that was part of your pre-work today. So in a nutshell, collect walkthrough data, identify patterns and analyze that data, and then make a plan, right? Given your own school context and your own school data. So thinking about our time together today, what observation data will you look at to help you reflect on the current state of instruction? So whether that's you were able to get into classrooms and collect more immediate data, or maybe you're looking at your most recent set of observation data, we want you to be making a data informed, having data informed reflections during this next chunk of time. So with that, let's take stock in some progress as it relates to classroom instruction. So again, here you can either look at the pre-work. Again, thanks to those folks who turned in the pre-work via Google Classrooms. We saw those submissions, really excited to leave some additional comments and mine even further. So thank you so much for those who turned in the pre-work via that platform. But again, a lot of us either collected our own walkthrough data as part of the pre-work, or we have most recent walkthrough data. And today we're going to use that pre-work to interrogate and to ask ourselves some questions. So with that, there are these 5 questions that are in your participant handout. Right now, we're going to use them to reflect either independently or with your school team. If you're, like LPS and you have other folks in your room with you, you can use these 5 questions to process this as a group. Feel free to go off camera, but what we're going to do is set a timer for about 7 minutes. Leaves about a minute-ish to respond to the question. So don't overthink these, but we want to give you some time to dig into these questions independently. And then when we come back after 7 minutes, you're actually going to be paired with a different school to talk through some of this progress. Okay, 7 minutes, responding to these 5 questions. Feel free to use bullets in your participant handout, and we'll pick back up shortly. in we're going to be in about groups of 3. So if you are going to a breakout room and you are physically present with other members of your team, feel free to designate a speaker who can, share and interact so that way there's equal talk space. But it's an opportunity for us to connect with other school leaders and hear about some of the advancements happening at our respective campuses. So with that, let's go ahead and open up breakout rooms, and you'll have about 6 minutes in breakout rooms.
if it was pairs and we were both in one, maybe we were just supposed to
Well-
partner in one. There was no third person.
Awesome. I think just about everyone is back. Let's hear from some folks. How were conversations? Like during your partner share, if you could shout out maybe a colleague or a peer from your breakout room, that'd be awesome. What are some great things happening at other schools that you want to highlight and draw attention to? Don't let me cold call.
I'm going to give a shout out to Katie in Winnebago. She has said that their district was very intentional with providing lessons at grade level this year, and then also focusing on opportunities to respond in the classroom. And they've seen an increase in those opportunities and in their data throughout the school year.
Awesome.
Okay, I'll give a shout out to Lucas at Maywood, now that I know where Maywood is. So I got a little geography lesson, but sounds like they have partnered with TNTP this year, have lots of great observations and just with a goal to get into classrooms more. And because of that, I've had some great conversations and moving forward. So sounds like exciting things happening. So good for them.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Deirdre. Let's get two more folks to share out from their breakout rooms. What were some things you heard? Awesome, whether it's, we summarize the conversation happening in your breakout room or shouting out here for things happening on their campus.
I will give a shout out to LPS Clinton and Omaha Nation with Katie and Karen. And both teams, even though in different areas, they found a lot of power in the feedback given to teachers and the relationships that are formed after those walkthroughs. So nice job.
Awesome. Awesome. We have time for one more.
A theme in our breakout room was looking at the impact of the lesson design on student interaction, cognitive load, thinking versus what the teacher's doing. So really shifting our focus from what the teacher's doing to the impact it has on student learning and thinking.
Awesome. Yay. And something I heard over there too was the instructional materials are not the lesson plan, right? You still have to look at your instructional materials, look at your HQIM and plan the lesson for your students, and giving that critical feedback was hit home, if you will, because it makes it feel like, yes, a lot of the conversations we're having in these spaces are really resonating and making their way into the classroom level. So yay, amazing. It was good to pop into some of the breakout rooms and hear the great dialogue happening in your spaces. So with that, let's go ahead and think about our essential question in another context. And I'll pass things over to Namisha.
Yeah, so we're coming back to that essential question. How are we going to keep the momentum you've built and that you just had the chance to reflect on, and that progress you've started to make? How are we going to keep that momentum going into next year? So we just spent some time reflecting, kind of looking back at this year. Now we're going to start looking forward a little bit to do some interrogating. So let's get into interrogating our plans for instruction. So we've taken stock of our journey so far. We're going to use that same essential question to put our eyes on the horizon. So as school leaders, you don't need us to tell you this, but you know that you all have goals. You all have so many different priorities that you are working towards achieving, and you have different goals and plans to achieve them. Additionally, we know that all of your plans have all kinds of different priorities, right? There are so many different things that you need to be problem solving for at any given time, whether it's because it's something that you've identified or it's something that you have to prioritize because, for accountability purposes for XYZ reason, right? And that can range from absenteeism to installing a new turf field for your sports program, right? School leaders have to think for all of these priorities, school leaders have to think in a complex network of interconnected and mutually reinforcing priorities. But we know, and something we've talked about and really focused on in this series, is that one of the critical hats principals wear is the hat of an instructional leader, right? And that's what we've really latched onto in this series and what we're going to focus on in this session as well. So while you might have elements of your school improvement plan, strategic plan, whatever plan you're working with today, there might be elements in there not tied specifically to instruction. We're focusing today on the instructional piece, on the instructional plans and priorities you have going into next year. To help you manage all of those different hats you wear, strategic planning, of course, is a tool that we're all leveraging from our toolbox, right? As part of your CSI designation, you all had to submit SFI applications, which ultimately sort of serve as a bit of a school improvement plan, right? But let's face it, that plan, like some of the others you've likely created, are written for a very specific audience and thus are written in a very specific way. Your own school-facing improvement plans or strategic plans might look really different or be called something else altogether. Regardless of what you're calling it, it likely has priorities, initiatives, action steps written down. these are the documents that we're going to be living in for the next chunk of time. So we want to give everybody just a minute or two right now to access whatever plans you have for improving instruction in your school that you have written down. And we want to encourage you to actually pull up the plans that you actually use. We recognize you might have some elements of plans that like had to be submitted for certain things, right? But if it's not something that is a living document that you are using kind of to drive your school's work, it might not be the most useful thing to pull up right now. So we want you to take a minute to pull up instructional plans that you use on a regular basis. And I will also name that ideally it's a plan that you've started looking ahead for next year, but if you haven't gotten there yet, you can pull up any instructional plan you have for this year as a starting place. So give everybody a minute to find whatever documents you want to work with, and then feel free to come off mute or pop in the chat if you have a question about what you should be looking for. Okay, I'm gonna keep us moving. So just a second, I have many windows open on my screen. All right, so while it's hard to explicitly define certain terms because of the overlap between all of them, we want to be clear that the gist is that we're messaging for today is that all plans should include similar things. So we're going to quickly voice over what some of these things might be called, and the purpose of this is just to emphasize that your plans might use different language. Some of you might call something a priority, whereas someone else calls it a goal. We don't want to get lost in the weeds of that today. But all plans, regardless of what you're calling things, should include an element of like big picture ideas that then whittle down to the tactical, right? Even a single lesson plan is expected to have big picture elements like an objective or an essential question that then whittle down throughout the plan into tactical elements like stop and jots or turn and talks, right? So our plans, whatever plans you're working with today, your instructional plans, should have both that big picture and tactical pieces. So when we're talking about big picture elements of your plans, we're talking about words like priorities, goals, targets, focus, objectives. And when we're talking about the tactical elements, that includes things like action steps, action items, activities, owners, metrics. All of these things together make up your instructional plan. So we just want to name this to say we're going to be using, a set of language in the rest of this session, but just know that your plans might call these things something else, and that's okay. All right, in just a moment, we're going to have you think strategically about where on these particular spectrums your instructional plans fall. But we're going to kind of do a think aloud model for you to explain what this even means. So we want you to think about the priorities you have in your instructional plans on a spectrum of big picture to tactical and immediate to long term. So let's just talk through a couple of examples. So maybe as an action step in your instructional plan, let's imagine that you have written down for next week's teacher in service that there's going to be some professional development on how to leverage writing strategies across content areas to see improvements in demonstration of learning. This is something that would fall in the tactical and immediate quadrant of this graph, because it's something that can be addressed immediately, and it's addressing sort of a discrete priority that can be acted on quickly. So now let's think about the other end of that spectrum, and give us another example. So at the end of last year, some of you set school improvement goals around NSCAS. That sounded something like, by May 2024, NSCAS ELA proficiency will increase from 36 to 46% in grades 3 through 6, as evidenced by a minimum of 35 students being on track. A goal like that would fall into this big picture, long-term quadrant because of the time it takes to see progress, and because getting to that kind of broad goal requires taking many smaller actions and kind of piecing that goal into many smaller parts. So we know that there are goals and priorities that are planned even further down the line than 1 year, like you might have 3 or 5 year priorities. But this is just one example of something that would fall in the big picture long-term quadrant. So just to get really specific on how we're defining these pieces, so we're going to ask you to place your plans in these quadrants in a moment. When we say big picture, we're talking about broader ideas or solutions that are being pursued. These are likely the goals, the priorities or goals in your plan. On the other end of that spectrum, on that vertical axis, we have tactical. These are hyper-specific ideas or solutions that can be executed quickly to address discrete things, purposes. On the horizontal axis, we have immediate to long-term, right? Immediate, of course, are solutions that can be implemented and are intended to be implemented quickly with a quick turnaround, whereas long-term solutions may take a year or more even to execute. All right. So we just did a quick kind of model of this thinking, and now we're going to give you a pretty solid chunk of time. I think you'll have about 15 minutes to think through your own instructional plans and where your goals, priorities, action steps, where those fall in this quadrant. So what you're going to do in the next 15 minutes is spend a few minutes looking over your plans, really focusing on the parts of your plans that are about instructional improvement. And then complete step 1 in a worksheet that I believe everyone has access to. Nadia, Abby, jump in if I'm saying this wrong. But I believe everyone has access to this worksheet via Google Classroom. Oh, and it looks like Abby just put a link to that assignment in the chat as well. So when you open this assignment, you're going to have a separate worksheet from your handout where you're going to be filling in your school's information. And we just need one for each school, unless you want to have your own separate ones. But when you get into this worksheet, you're going to identify where on the quadrant each of the parts of your plan fall, and then you'll see some reflection questions beneath that. Take some time to discuss and answer those reflection questions. And then whenever you're done with step 1, move on to step 2 in that handout, where you're going to be identifying some areas of opportunity in your plans. Questions about what we're doing? All right, we are asking, we're collecting this worksheet via Google Classroom separately so that for each school, so that we can collect one for each school team and get a better idea of what future support for leaders could look like. So please do make sure that you are answering these questions in that worksheet via Google Classroom. All right, let's do 15 minutes. Feel free to come off mute or pop in the chat if you have questions or can't find something. I think we have everybody back. Yep. All right. Before we're gonna take a 5-minute break in a couple of minutes. But before we do that, would love to hear reflections from a few folks. What did you notice through doing this exercise?
We talked about how a lot of our goals and kind of action steps right now are falling either in that top right, so the big picture kind of long term, or that bottom left, so immediate and tactical, and kind of finding that balance of. We also like this visual too of talking through that with teachers and how I think we present things sometimes in our minds it's big picture, but if teachers don't feel that it's big picture or long term, it can be overwhelming and then they're not sure where our focus is. So I think putting this in front of staff too could be helpful in terms of prioritizing those. Where are we going first and where are we going eventually?
Let's hear from at least one more person. What did you notice through this exercise, and did any of it surprise you looking at it in this way?
Yeah, I'm curious if like there are any plans that was mostly all just one quadrant. You know what I mean? Like you're like, oh man, like pretty much everything's big picture. Almost everything's in the action planning corner. I'm curious if anybody found that out. That's a really good question, Molly. It's kind of about balance, and it's less about being dictative of do this, not that, but it's more about where are your plans currently and are there gaps, like potential gaps or places of opportunity that aren't being leveraged currently. So I don't know if it's like as easy to say, yes, there should be X everywhere, but it's man, yeah, I'm starting to notice if all of my planning lives over here versus over here, then there might be some missed opportunities by not thinking about priorities and thus action steps and other spaces too. So it's more just like a opportunity to take stock and what do we currently got going on, you know?
Yeah, to me, I also think about it's a good, just like a gut check and just a pause to reflect on like, is everything we're doing just like immediate and urgent? Or are we not addressing the immediate things because we're so focused on these longer term, like district priorities, maybe? So it's just a good kind of gut check to say, are we missing something when we're in the weeds every day? All right, I know Nadia and I just talked, but I still want to hear from one more person. What'd you notice?
I just think like separate of the quadrants, it's good to look at your goals and your steps and see what's being done with fidelity and maybe what needs like a little bit of fine tuning. So for us to talk about our goals and like who's going to be involved. So just like kind of a separate of the quadrants and the exit statement was just to see like how things are going based on what we said we would do.
All right, thank you guys for sharing. We will take a 5-minute break. We will start back at 10:25. See y'all soon.
Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you had a good quick break, and let's go ahead and jump into our next segment. So, looking at your plans, you're able to see where do we might maybe have some spaces or opportunities to, you know, get granular, or where do we have opportunities to get big picture? Ultimately, when we look at our plans in this kinds of way, it helps us, yes, reflect on what's our progress today, who's doing what. But additionally, where are there opportunities to hold ourselves a little bit more accountable and make sure we get things down in writing? I'm literally looking at my planner. You can't see it because of my weird background blur. I'm looking at my planner, and I know me. Sometimes if things don't end up in that planner, they just don't get done. So oftentimes our plans function in very similar ways. But instead of hearing it from us, lecturing at you all about the power of writing things down, we actually found this really cool article, really quick read. It's in your handout. And Abby, thank you so much for putting that in the chat. But really, it's 4 questions. It's a really brief read, so it'll give you about 3 minutes to skim it, read it. And 4 questions are pretty straightforward. What resonated with you as you read the article? What challenged your thinking as you read it? What are your current strengths and growth areas when it comes to writing things down and getting very granular and specific in your plans? And how would your schedule need to change to allow for more time to record your plans? Because ultimately, that's a lot of where the rub comes in is, man, how do I have time to take all this thinking and get it down somewhere digitally or on paper, etc. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes for this article, read it over, and then we'll send you to groups to chat. Okay, welcome back. So what did we discuss? What resonated with you? What challenged your thinking? What are the current strengths when it comes to writing down goals and priorities and action steps, whether at the personal level or, when you think about specifically as you're managing your schools and running your schools, what are some of the strengths and areas of growth that you might have noticed and what resonated with you with this article?
Our group talked about while we develop our school improvement plan, we look at it every quarter as a group, we revise, we make edits. We did think that the idea of vividly writing down your plans and adding visuals, those sorts of things, that could be a great whole staff activity in the fall, is to kind of develop that vivid goal so that it's really clear and people have internalized it.
Yeah, awesome. Like internalizing, just because we say something doesn't mean it's internalized, right? Like there are other things that we have to do in order for our goals to be internalized and for people to understand their work in relation to that goal and how they are contributing towards that goal, regardless of what role they're in within your building. Big time. Other ideas, what resonated, what challenged, what other reflections did folks have?
One thing we talked about is just like making things visible and how that's so powerful for our students and how like we've used goal setting with our students and how that has pushed them to want to do better and to reach those goals and make that progress. So if that's something that's powerful for students, it could also be just as powerful for us as leaders and and for our school staff. So how can we take what we already do and we know works with students and apply that to ourselves?
I love that. 100%. Could not agree more. We oftentimes think, oh yeah, that works for kids, you know what I mean? But we don't then think about, wait, why aren't I doing this? Like I need to be doing the same thing. If it helps transfer and internalize and make things feel really solid and clear, I could be doing the same level of work and putting the same level of detail down into my own plans as a leader, 100%. Let's get one more reflection. Does someone want to pat themselves on the back if you're like, man, not only do I have a goal and priority, but I have every action step, every owner, I have deadlines, I have it all. If you're one of those people, let us know. Come off mute. Come to the forefront. Okay, well, keep that in the back of your mind in the interest of time, because we are gonna, you know, build some systems to help us get really tactical and do these exact things. So let's go ahead and move into our last segment together, which is the planning, right? So again, we're thinking about this essential question. How do you keep and maintain that momentum? You keep and maintain that momentum ultimately by getting very clear on how, what are the things that need to be done? What are the things that need to be replicated? And how do we codify things? You know, oftentimes we say, yeah, we're having conversations with teachers. We're talking with teachers. Do you have a consistent debrief agenda? Do you have the reflection questions that you consistently ask every time? Or is it kind of off the cuff, on the fly? Because then at that point, how do you do quality checks? How do you know what is working and what's not if we don't have opportunities to codify and then collect data on that process, right? If we're asking the same 5 reflection questions every time and we're noticing, wow, that's really leading to these outcomes, that's something we need to capture, but we can only capture that if we have it written down and actually spelled out. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about how to turn this into actionable steps for us. So in that same handout, again, this is something you'll be turning in because we'd love to see it and see how you're thinking, see how your brains work as it relates to this. We're going to do this specifically around instructional coaching. Again, instructional coaching is done with intention. It's not just pop-ins, seeing instruction, having a conversation in a hall, having a quick touch point. When we think about coaching, it's definitely that larger system of supports, that consistent feedback, that follow up and follow through with teachers. And the best way to make sure that happen is with planning, scheduling, putting things down, setting up systems and parameters around these things. So when you reflect on these 4 quadrants, where do you want instructional coaching to live? Maybe your team is so small and you're still getting things up and off the ground. So it has to be a little bit more big picture and long term. Maybe you've already laid a ton of groundwork this year. You've talked about the TNCP core rubric or whatever vision for instruction you're using to observe. You've had conversations with teachers about your goals for instructional coaching at your school, and it feels ready to get off the ground sooner. In that case, maybe it falls more into that immediate end of the spectrum. Know where you are and calibrate where you are as schools, but getting really granular, where does instructional coaching need to live at your schools in order to keep the momentum going? Follow up and follow through is the only way the work is going to continue. So you're going to move on to step 3 in your handouts, which is getting very tactical, naming your priority, which tends to be big picture, but then getting down to the action planning. Who's doing what, by when? What are the actual things that are happening at your schools to make instructional coaching a reality for teachers, whether that, you know, regardless of where they are in their teaching journey. Again, if just like our article said, if we're not writing down instructional coaching specifically as a goal or priority and planning for it to happen, then it's likely to not happen. So how do we maintain this momentum? Let's put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, if you will. So we're going to give you some work time, about 15 or so minutes, and then we'll come back together to reflect on the process. But at this time, definitely we encourage you to work with your school teams. We'll open up breakout rooms again, like Abby did last time, if you want to get to the same virtual space and chat as a school team. But we'll open up breakout rooms. Thank you so much, Abby, for doing that. But if you want to get started with because you're physically sitting with other people right now, awesome. You can go ahead and get started on step 3 in your handout. you have any questions, come off and you ask or chat me. Happy to dig in. Okay, welcome back. I know that was brief. Again, the goal was to get started, start thinking about, well, what are all the pieces of planning that really should be down in writing if we're going to get instructional coaching off of the ground and flowing in the next however long for our team. So just out of curiosity, was anyone able to think about a priority or set a priority for themselves, either in the more immediate or long term, or at the big picture or more tactical level? Any sample priorities folks would like to share? Either come off mute or drop them in the chat. We'd love to see a few examples.
So one priority we worked on and talked about was that we did some shifting and adjusting of our coaching cycles at our school after one of our CSI meetings in the fall. And so we'd like to go back and talk with teachers and survey about whether they found the changes beneficial or not beneficial, and how we can move forward into next year using the best process for both coaches and for teachers as well.
Amazing. Yes, get that teacher input, building that investment. Amazing. Love it. Yes, we see one in the chat. By the end of 2025, 100% of classrooms have 90% or more of scholars engaged. Nice, as evidenced by SIP walkthrough data gatherer. Wow, yes, yes. Give us one
I
or
also
two.
want to, sorry,
Oh,
I
no.
interrupted. Go ahead.
No,
I
go.
was just gonna piggyback off of, I was poking around, you guys probably saw me creeping on some of your documents. But I poked around on the Huntington one, and I also wanted to call out something that you guys have in your plan that I think is really smart, which is quarterly benchmarks. So thinking about, like, even for the teacher survey, for example, like if we have this goal quarterly, what data are we going to collect? What metric are we using to measure? Maybe it's the teacher survey, maybe something like that. You give it quarterly, like plan ahead of time. At the end of every quarter, we're going to collect this data. So you're not scrambling at the last minute to figure out what data do we have that tells us if we're on track. So I just wanted to highlight that Huntington team as a best practice. So yeah, shout out.
Yes, any other priority set that folks like to share? We'd love to hear one or two more.
We tried to work to set up like a coaching cycle for next year. And how we want to divide our staff and get to everybody and things like that. So we're trying to work through that.
Okay. Sounds good. So it sounds like y'all are almost at that tactical level, right? Getting at how do we divide? How do we, utilize our time to make sure that the coaching can get off the ground and people can get the observations and feedback that they need. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on, and just any kind of big picture reflection. We'd love to hear from you all, thinking about the process, the questions, and the thinking we engaged in today. What did you find beneficial or supportive, and why? Like, was this a helpful exercise thinking about where should instructional coaching live? How immediate versus long-term do we want things to be? And let's get priorities written down so we can actually make them a reality. So anything about today standing out as beneficial or supportive, and why? Yes, Namisha dropped something in the chat, and I just want to also say like, and how could you lean on other folks for support with us, especially at the ESU level? Shout out to Molly, right, who was in a breakout room chatting with Reed over in ESU 8 about ways that her and her team can also offer supports when it comes to instructional coaching, increasing capacity to do observations and having those conversations with teachers. So really want to shout out, yes, like sometimes your teams are small and we need to think about beyond just, you know, your immediate capacity, what are other ways that we can increase capacity too. So just really great thinking, great problem solving happening over there. Well, I see folks over at the color team nodding their heads and all of that. So maybe one of y'all could come off mute and share that whole group.
My video's off.
Ah. All right, hold on. So we were talking about how we feel, we were giving high fives because we're feeling like we're on the right track. We were just reflecting on once we had created the data gatherer and connected that to the PD that we do twice a month with our staff. And that's anytime we go into a classroom, it's what we use to give feedback. And really we took some learning from TNTP of like, we're looking at students every time the first thing we do is we count how many kids are in there, what time we got there. Those things have, we just really got some momentum starting in November and we're seeing it through. And so we're high-fiving in celebration. Still lots of work to be done, but.
Excited about where we're going.
Yep.
Love that. Thank you. Now I'm not feeling so bad for calling y'all out. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, so with that, maybe we're ready to start thinking ahead to what is to come. So believe it or not, our time working with the Nebraska Department of Education, especially around support for CSI schools, is coming to an official end. It's crazy that this 3-year contract is pretty much at the end of its 3 years. So there's been a lot of work that's happened over the years. We started to recap earlier, just from this year, but in addition, like since 2018, no, since 2021, I'm sorry, I said 2018, since 2021. So whether it's last year's learning around grade appropriate assignments and how to increase students' access to grade appropriate assignments, the instructional coaching learning for this year, you know, we've been thinking a lot about what are some different levers that we have access to really see improvement and gains in instruction. So with that, we just want a quick follow-up with you all one-on-one, mostly to gather information from you all so we can pass on to folks who can continue this work well beyond our time is up with Nebraska. And so, yeah, we want to offer an opportunity to put a bow on things. So the 2 main goals of this conversation is like a one-on-one conversation with either Namisha or myself to reflect on the content from CSI sessions within the context of your school improvement goals. And then think really strategically and specifically about those priorities, some of which you've named today for the next school year, and identify any areas for additional support if needed. Thinking about ESUs as well, like what we want to do is send you all the schedule and let you know, okay, who signed up when, please bookmark it so that we can see if there's opportunities to coordinate times. But yeah, so Namisha and I have essentially divided up schools. We have Betts, Color, Grant, Karen, Western, Lincoln Elementary, Omaha Nation, Walnut, and Huntington with Nemisha, and Bayard, Clinton, Dawes, Madison, Maywood, Walt Hill, Winnebago, and West Lawn meeting with me. So we have a link to that sign up. You don't have to sign up exactly this second, but we wanted to make sure you have it. Feel free to check your schedules. But we budgeted 45 minutes, but it will likely be more on the 30-minute end of the spectrum, but we just wanted to offer more time in the event we wanted to take the full time. Yes, thank you so much, Namisha, for that. Yes, we tried to divide it up based on where we've spent time on your campuses, since we have that additional context of what we've seen and what we've noticed happening at your schools. And really, we only have about 2 more things for our session today before we wrap up. We have a special treat at the very end of the session for you all. But before we get to that special treat, we do have, of course, a survey that we would like for you to complete. So the survey is mostly capturing, large reflections, not just about today's session, but really on the series as a whole. We really, really, really value your input. We want to pass this on to our friends at the ESUs, as well as to the NDE about this style of learning, what works from it. NDE is really trying to take notes so that they can continuously improve themselves. Please, please, please take a few minutes now. Consider this your exit ticket before you also turn in your handout from today's session. Please complete the survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. We'll give you about 5 to 6 minutes. We do have some open-ended questions on the survey, which is why we're giving a little bit more time today. Awesome. We see about 6 responses so far. We'll still leave a few more minutes for folks to continue working on their surveys. Thank you so much for filling that out. Okay, so as those last responses start to filter in, thank you so much for completing the survey. Namisha and I would like to leave you all with a little treat. So first and foremost, we want to make sure this is very, 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 very clear that we are saying this is preliminary, initial, raw data. Okay, again, preliminary, initial, raw data. So we at TNCP do a lot of quality checks, data validation, et cetera, to make sure that when the official diagnostic reports come out in PDF form, that there have been a lot of pressure testing on the data to make sure that, you know, all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted, et cetera. However, what we wanted to do was show a little bit of a bright spot. So this is the initial pull from the raw data from this round of academic diagnostics. So of the CSI schools that had an academic diagnostic happen at their school, we were able to pull some of the strong instruction data from those visits. Now, what's awesome, so this data is just for the observations conducted over the last month and a half-ish, compared to last year's observation data, right, from that diagnostic. And again, think about all the things that you all have been working towards, giving more feedback, increasing your capacity to instructionally coach teachers, thinking and recalibrating and fine-tuning your vision for strong instruction and what you're paying attention to as you observe classes. So as you can see in every point, strong culture, grade level content, high quality instructional practice, student ownership, and grade level reading foundations, there have been increases in every area since the last round of academic diagnostics. So again, this is just preliminary data. You will get your individual school reports when, Namisha, in June, did we say? In June. But we wanted to leave on this positive note. We actually were able to share some of this data yesterday at SDA, and which then pushed us over the hump. We're like, should we share this with the CSI school? They're like, yeah, let's share it with them too. So we're really excited and just so proud and feel so honored to be able to have engaged in this work alongside you. And in case you're feeling like, what progress are we seeing? How do we actually know whether the things are working? There's at least some initial data points to be able to point to that says, wow, the work that folks are doing and the structures that folks are putting in place are really having a positive impact on instruction at your schools. So just want to say thank you. Thank you for those who stuck with the whole session, who stayed until the end. You got to see this awesome treat. Please don't share this data yet, right? Don't share this widely. And we're really excited to be able to get you the more official buttoned up data soon, but just wanted to leave you with this positive note. That's it, folks. This is the last one. Thank you all so much. Namisha, do you have anything to add?
No, just this is our last session with you all, virtually or otherwise, probably. Unless you are coming to our Science of Reading stuff in May, you will see Nadia and me again. But it's just been such a pleasure to work with you all. Some of you, I know, like Reed, and there might be a couple of others who have like been seeing me on virtual sessions since like August 2021. So shout out to all of you for being along for the ride with us and helping us learn some really valuable lessons and helping us figure out how to support you better. You guys are doing incredible work. We love Nebraska. And that's it. You have our email addresses if you have any other questions. And when you get your reports from me in June, you'll have the opportunity to sign up for a debrief so that we can chat through the data in your report and what it might mean for your plans next year. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.